Welcome to datascience.show, the podcast where data science meets executive leadership. We talk with top AI and analytics thought leaders about turning data into real business impact. If you're a C-level leader or data expert shaping the future, you're in the right place.
Let me start with two short stories that should make any boardroom sit up. First, a bank deploys a credit decision model, confident in its risk predictions. 1 quarter later, a strategic client, the kind that matters for revenue and reputation, gets declined. The model's score looked rock solid. The team trusted the confidence band, and yet the decline turns into a regulatory call and a board question. How could we be so sure and so wrong? Second, a digital product team tunes a recommender to maximize engagement. It amplifies a behavior that looks good in lab metrics, but over time pushes a fragile segment into churn. The model kept recommending the same loop, each suggestion delivered with louder confidence, and churn accelerates. In both cases, the common thread isn't a buggy algorithm, it's confident failure. And confident failures are the ones that become board surprises.
So here's the promise for the next 20 minutes. I'll give you a decision-first playbook to treat model uncertainty as a funded, auditable risk. Call it uncertainty accounting. 3 verbs: measure, budget, hedge. Measure the confidence and its gaps. Budget for the exposure that those gaps represent. Hedge so optimism doesn't become a material surprise. That's the decision promise. If you walk away with one specific pilot plan and 3 board KPIs, I've done my job.
First, taxonomy, because language matters at the executive table. There are 3 executive-facing buckets of uncertainty. 1. Aleatoric uncertainty. This is irreducible randomness in the world. Think noisy inputs or customers behaving unpredictably. 2. Epistemic uncertainty. Uncertainty from what we don't know or haven't learned yet, often due to limited data or model capacity. 3. Distributional shift. When tomorrow's population looks different from yesterday's training set, seasonality or a market shock. Map these to stakes. Aleatoric calls for conservative decision thresholds. Epistemic calls for data investment, controlled rollout, and human review. Distributional shift calls for fast detection, rollback gates, and funding reserves. Naming these at the board level changes the conversation from the model failed to which uncertainty bucket triggered and how do we trigger it financially.
Next, minimal evidence packs. Don't ask engineers for every possible metric. Ask for a compact, auditable set that your finance and legal teams can understand. At minimum demand, calibrated probabilities with calibration curves, prediction intervals for numeric forecasts, and confidence-stratified cohort checks show how outcomes distribute across confidence bands. Insist on decision-aware confidence histograms. For each confidence bucket, show the actual delta in business outcome. Retain a sample of inputs and model outputs for 90 days or a contractually agreed window, so audits are possible. These are not engineering vanity metrics. These are your board-level evidence packs.
Now, the part executives ask for first. How do you turn a calibration gap into dollars? Start simple and conservative. Define calibration gap as the difference between forecasted probability and observed frequency in a cohort. Multiply that gap by the average decision value to get a revenue at risk estimate. For example, if a model says 90% approval success for a cohort, but actual success is 80%, that's a 10-point calibration gap. If that cohort represents $10 million in annualized exposure, a back-of-envelope expected loss is 10% of $10 million, so $1 million of exposure. From there, assign a remediation budget. A conservative rule is to fund 50% of that exposure as an immediate reserve for remediation and customer make-good costs while you instrument fixes. That gives finance a defensible number to hold and procurement something concrete to negotiation. Which brings us to a practical hedging toolbox, low-friction levers you can activate without rebuilding models. First, conservative defaults. Shift decision thresholds towards safety for high-exposure cohorts until calibration improves. Second, staged funding reserves.
Set aside a percentage of expected value as a contingency line that funds remediation and customer remediation. Third, human review corridors. Route mid-confidence or high-impact decisions to a human-in-the-loop queue with clear SLAs. Fourth, ensemble uncertainty cushions. Where feasible, use ensemble variance as a short-term signal to throttle automated actions. Fifth, parametric insurance triggers. Work with risk and legal to define trigger metrics that automatically invoke insurance or remediation credits. These are composable. Use one or several depending on exposure and cost.
Procurement and vendor language matter more than you think. Don't buy models that hide confidence outputs. Add contract clauses that require uncertainty hooks, exportable calibrated scores, a confidence export SLA, and an attestation of calibration tests on a pilot dataset. Include remediation credits or price concessions if the vendor's calibration gap exceeds agreed thresholds during an initial live trial. Insist on a 2-track procurement cadence. Pilot scope with minimal exports and attestations first. Only after a successful drill, move to contractually binding SLAs. Put an executive sponsor, often the CDO or CRO, on the clause and make it part of the purchase sign-off checklist. Operational governance. Who signs the hedge and when? My recommendation, a tri-signer model for hedges. The CDO owns the measurement. The CFO owns the budget reserve, and the relevant line of business leader owns the invocation gate. Define clear invocation criteria, a calibration gap above threshold, a rising uncertainty burn rate, or a distributional shift alarm. Monitor on a weekly cadence at first and move to monthly for stable flows. Report 3 board KPIs, calibration gap, percentage points, uncertainty burn rate, dollars per month depleted from reserve, and hedge coverage percentage. What percent of exposure is under an active hedge? Those 3 KPIs convert model fuzziness into auditable finance metrics.
You can't mandate everything at once, so run a 30-90-day pilot. Pick one critical flow with high visibility and measurable value, a loan decision lane, a retention campaign, or a pricing signal. Instrument baseline metrics for calibration and business outcome. Sample uncertainty exports for the cohort, and run a hedged canary. Limit automation for high uncertainty cases while logging outcomes. Week 1, baseline capture and calibration curve. Weeks 2 to 4, deploy human review corridors and a small reserve. Weeks 5 to 12, measure impact, adjust thresholds, and document remediation costs. Deliver a concise board brief at day 30 with the calibration baseline and a remediation estimate. That narrow pilot is your proof of evidence for broader policy.
Before I close, 3 immediate executive moves you can make tomorrow. 1. Demand the minimal evidence pack for every high-impact model in production and set a 90-day retention window for sampled outputs. 2. Create a reserved remediation budget tied to calibration gap estimates. Start with a conservative funding rule, for example, 50% of the estimated exposure. 3. Run a focused 30 to 90-day pilot on one critical flow and brief the board with the 3 KPIs, calibration gap, uncertainty burn rate, hedge coverage percent. Do those 3 things and you convert an abstract risk into auditable capital.
To wrap up, models can be powerful, but unchecked confidence is an operational and financial risk. Measure calibration, dollarize the exposure, and buy hedges where you can't remove uncertainty immediately. Run the pilot, codify governance, and put those KPIs into the board pack. If you do this, you move from models to measurable value, and you prevent optimistic AI from becoming a material surprise. That's the difference between models and value.
Thanks for listening to datascience.show. If you found value in this episode, subscribe, share it with your network, and join us next time as we explore how data science drives smarter decisions and better business outcomes.